as I want to talk about a little bit about Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin, I think the larger Web3 economy, I think I'm of the belief that it's really one of the most important inventions of our lifetime, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. I think you could make the argument that Bitcoin is similar to something as transformational as the printing press and or the internet. I think it's something that big, and I know Bitcoin. There's Bitcoin, crypto, and Web3, and they're kind of all the same thing, but they're kind of not. So Bitcoin kind of birthed this blockchain or like crypto movement, and then Web3 is kind of the new technologies that are using this technology. So yeah, I think one way that I want to kind of talk about Bitcoin is an accounting innovation. So what do I mean by that? I think like at its core, Bitcoin is an accounting innovation. So if you think of accounting right now, the popular mode of accounting, I know, please stick with me because I know accounting is boring, it's dry, but obviously it's very important because money's involved. So right now we have double entry accounting. So let me start at the beginning. Back in the caveman days, you can think of it as money. So let's even broaden out. Let's just talk about money in accounting. So back in the caveman days, you could say zero entry accounting, right? So if I'm a caveman, you're a caveman or cavewoman, and we are in a tribe, we might be trading things. So like I might be helping you build a hut, or maybe you help go pick some berries for me. So we're interacting. We're in an economy where I do things for you, you do things for me. There's no actual place that it's all written down, right? Like we all remember back in the caveman days, right? Okay, so we're not in suits and ties. We're living in caves, living on doing what cave people do. Maybe we're fighting Neanderthals. But yeah, we have an economy within our tribe. We do favors for each other. I do favors for you. You do favors for me. We're exchanging value back and forth, but there's nowhere that it's written down, right? We have zero entries of it. It's in my head. So it might not be written down, but I remember that last week I helped you build your hut and you never returned the favor in any way. So I might, in my own software, in my individual ledger, remember that. And that's kind of, even now, you kind of remember. We do use forms of zero entry accounting when we're kind of interacting with our friends and family. We might remember, hey, I helped my friend with this, but they never helped me. Or maybe, I helped him. I scratched their back. They scratched my back. We're even. Our ledger is balanced. So that was, back in the caveman, the earliest days of humanity, we had zero entry accounting. Then we had an innovation of, let's say, I like to call it single entry accounting, right? So then the world of kings and pharaohs emerged. And we still had an economy, but the innovation that the kings and the pharaoh said is, hey, I'm the king, I'm the pharaoh, I have the power. Let's do a single entry accounting where I will keep a record of everything. So the kings or the pharaohs, instead of, they would record the entries into the ledger. So they would be, the single source of truth in their economy because they had all the wealth. So they were kind of ultimately responsible for recording kind of the economy, whether it be on a tablet or just, I'm trying to think of Game of Thrones where the short guy was like the hand of the king of like there might be a treasure, but ultimately it was the king or the pharaoh that maintained the source of truth for the economy. Then emerged what might be the most important invention, or I don't want to say maybe the most, but an important invention, which was double entry accounting, which is the type of accounting that we're currently doing. So this is ultimately banks and merchants like use double accounting. So if you think of a bank, essentially we went from the king saying I have the only source of the record, where the banks and the merchants, what they said came up as we'll have two entries. You'll have an entry, I'll have an entry, but the merchant or the bank will be the record of. So you kind of have the middlemen. So it went from being one source of truth to two sources of truth. If I traded with you or you traded with me, we would record it in a ledger, and then that ledger we would both trust the banker to keep a copy of it, so we could just keep a track of that record. So this wasn't the bank having the entry of the pharaoh. This was different than the pharaoh, the king having the entry where they had the only one. This was literally bankers and merchants kind of being middlemen of seeing this. Oh, we could do double entry where both parties in the transaction or in the accounting system have a record. And the reason you need a middleman is, say I have a record. Say in my record, you paid me $300, but in your record, you paid me $500, right? So if both parties on either side of the double entry ledger can manipulate their record, that won't be feasible, right? Because then you'll just have constant arguments of two parties in interaction. Like, they could lie, they could fudge, but they could have disagreements. So that's why the banks and the merchants said, hey, you'll each get a record, but we'll hold the record. So you can trust me, I can trust you, or like you both trust the bank, and the bank will kind of hold the double entry and be kind of the efficient. So what Bitcoin does through blockchain is it kind of, so right now with double entry, how it works is I have a record, you have a record, and the banks hold that entry or that accounting ledger. Whereas Bitcoin says you have a record, I have a record, but everyone else has a record. So essentially, Bitcoin and blockchain, what it does is it, instead of centralizing that record into a bank, because the problem with double entry is both parties can trust the bank and share their double entry ledger there. Ultimately, the bank or the merchant has a lot of power, right? They have the entry, so they could actually fudge the number, and both parties would trust them, which is what blockchain and Bitcoin does. Is, and why I call it triple entry, is I would have a record, you'd have a record, but the blockchain, or we can think of everybody has a record. So if one node or one bank, tries to fudge the record, all the other, if everyone has a copy of it, they can all say, hey, well, everyone else's record says this, your record's wrong. So it kind of takes away the centralization of right now with double entry. It trusts two parties in an interaction, trusting an intermediary with that. Whereas if you, instead of trusting one entity, trust all the entities or multiple entities to hold that record, then you kind of lessen the risk of any one entity changing that record, because if one person does it, it would require everyone else in the network to change that record. So that's why Bitcoin and blockchain, you can think of it as like a triple entry. So the caveman, we had 0 entries. There was no written records. Then emerged single entry accounting, where the king and the pharaoh kept the only record. And now we are changing from double entry accounting, whereas two parties trust a central entity to hold an accounting balance, and we're moving towards triple entry, which is both those parties will have a record, but the third entry, there will be a third entry, which will be everywhere. So I hope I hope that kind of makes sense, and I'll probably try to think of better ways to communicate that and maybe explain a little bit better. But I think Bitcoin fundamentally is an accounting innovation. Specifically, what it does is it solves the Byzantine generals problem. So the Byzantine generals problem is this would require its own segment too, but it's essentially a mathematical computer problem that kind of it's a math problem that essentially was why we needed a bank. It was around trusting middlemen. You need a trusted intermediary, whereas by solving the Byzantine generals problem, you can kind of build a trustless network. But I'm not prepared to speak on that right now. That's probably something I'll do a shorter segment on in the future. But yeah, I just want people to think of Bitcoin as an accounting innovation. The reason I say it's an accounting innovation is I think another way to I think one thing that before we can even get into Bitcoin's a scam, or if it's not a scam, which, maybe it is a scam, maybe it's not. Who am I to say? But one thing I think that's important before you can even get to that conversation of is Bitcoin a scam, you need to either come to agreement, or it needs to be stated that Bitcoin is money. So what do I mean that? So I think we can talk about whether the Bitcoin network is a scam, whether it's not. I'm open to that, but I think before you can even get to that argument, we have to come to agreement that Bitcoin is money. So I know when people say money, they think of the U.S. dollar, because that's what most Americans use now. But over the course of humanity, there's been lots of form of money, and essentially, money. There's five important elements of money, right? So the 5 elements of money. So for anything to be considered money, whether it's a seashell, whether it's a piece of gold, a piece of copper, a US dollar, it needs to have 5 certain elements, right? So those 5 elements are divisibility, durability, portability, recognizability, and scarcity. So let me say those again. So the five properties that something has to have in order to be money are divisibility, recognizability, portability, durability, and scarcity. So let's break those down, one by one, right? So the first one is divisibility. Money needs to be divisible, right? because if it can't be divisible, then it's not really useful for helping record really granular economic transactions. So you can imagine a world, imagine there was only $100 bills. So that wouldn't be a very great source of money, because if anything was between, I don't know, even, 0 or 99, there'd be no way to actually divide the transactions. You're really limited to, the size of the transactions. So divisibility is very important. So we all kind of get that stack of, like, if we all had $100 bills in our pockets, that wouldn't be really great, because anything between, anything less than that, it would be hard to, in a world where if anything either costed $100, $200, $300, $400, if I wanted to buy, I don't know, a can of beans, which right now is like $1, $2, that, if it wasn't divisible, a can of beans would have to be $100, because there's nothing less. And Bitcoin is divisible, right? So Satoshi designed 21 million units, or 21 million Bitcoins, but those Bitcoins, you don't have to have just one Bitcoin. And I think that's something people get confused on. Bitcoins also have a unit of measurement called a Satoshi. So a Bitcoin is just 100 million Satoshis, right? So we have 21 million Bitcoins, and then each of those Bitcoins is divisible into 100 million smaller units known as the Satoshi. Now, I probably should be able to do that math, but I can't do that math on the head. So yeah, Bitcoins are divisible. You might say, MetaChewy, what happens if, people want more than 100 million Satoshis per Bitcoin? And so the thing about the Bitcoin network is that you could actually keep dividing that Bitcoin further and further if you wanted to. So right now, I think it's, 8 decimals. It's divisible, but you could just keep moving the decimal point. So there would still be 21 million Bitcoins, but you could make the Satoshis, or maybe mini sats or tenths of sats. You could just keep moving the decimal point out if you wanted to get even more divisible. And I think